Welcome, Football Never Sleeps special recruiting edition here on Saturday, just on Monday night. I'm Eric Hansen, and the guy in the other square is Tom Lemming. From Football Report, Chicago area, and Oscar-winning performance, including blindside where he played himself. He's still aspiring to be viral, still well captivated, and still thinking for recruiting squad. On today's show, we'll review Notre Dame's recently signed 45-man class, highs and lows, and surprises. We also talk about wide receiver recruiting, even taking Irish parties, lessons learned from this site. Graphics, we don't need no sticky graphics. We need your questions and compliments. We're filling up the queue. This is
Football Never Sleeps.
all right. Tom, welcome to the show. Appreciate you joining us with your coat on. I did not wear my coat today.
Well, I'm in my car outside. I just came back from Chattanooga and Nashville and driving. Everywhere I go, it's cold, so gotta stay warm.
Okay, well, sounds good. Well, I appreciate you joining us today. We will get to some questions in a little bit as the question queue fills up. But I wanted to start out with the big picture. Let's look at the overall class, 25 players signed. I know that you give grades to classes. What ranking did you give Notre Dame's class nationally?
I had them 12th, or actually 11th. I thought they did a good job here at the end. Obviously, getting Madden was a big catch, but they didn't crack the top 10, which I thought they were going to do most of the year. But I also thought that always came with a little caveat with the quarterback Deuce. I always thought they were going to lose him the day they got him, just knowing where he was from and knowing the schools that recruit that area, like Auburn and Ole Miss and Alabama and LSU. So overall, I thought it was a very good class. Not a complete class, but a very good class.
Okay, so what went right for Notre Dame besides getting Madden Faramo at the end? What do you think they did the best with this class?
Defensive backs as always. Mike Mickens is the best DB recruiter in the country. Ohio State's got the best D-line recruiter and the best wide receiver. Georgia's got some great D-line recruiters and all that, but I think Mike Mickens is the best DB recruiter in the country. They even had Ivan Taylor for a long time, who became sort of a traveling man, going to Michigan and then winding up at Alabama. So, I mean, that was just a great defensive back group, I think, the guys they got. And also, I think, not just this year, but every other year, I think they always seem to do a real good job in the defensive backfield. And along the offensive line, they got three mammoth tackle prospects. I think what they were missing probably was a guard center type player, which they'll get this coming year.
Okay, let's not bury the lead here. Let's talk about wide receiver recruiting. What happened there? What do you think? Well, first of all, your assessment of it, and then why do you think maybe Notre Dame fell short of expectations there?
Well, first off, Mike Brown's a pretty good recruiter. He's proven himself in other schools, Wisconsin, Cincinnati. But I think I don't know if they had enough guys. To me, that's the easiest position to recruit. When I travel the country and I'll see the top 1,000 guys, almost 90% of them in person. There's so many wide receivers out there. So I think in the long run, I don't know if they had enough on their recruiting table from the beginning, because wide receivers are also the most tough guys to pin down. They usually have big egos. They love the money now with the NIL stuff. So you never know. Like, everybody thought Derek Meadows is going to go to Notre Dame. When I went out, and I've seen in the last couple of years during my visit, I have an annual visit to Gorman High School in Vegas, and I never got that idea. I thought they were in the mix. But once, everyone started coming after him. I said, well, you got him, but you should have another 20 guys in that wide receiver queue, just because these guys are flaky, and a lot of them you can't count on. You got to have enough, and I think that's what happened. And same thing with running back in the beginning. I don't think they had enough running backs they're going after, and they kind of settled for a couple of guys, questionable guys, early, and they responded later and got a very good one out of New Jersey. But I think wide receiver, they got lucky with Elijah Burris, though, because Elijah, as a junior, was pretty pedestrian stats, had pretty pedestrian stats. Wasn't very a guy you were going to say, oh, he's going to be a star. All of a sudden, he turned into a monster as a senior. So I think they're getting a very good player in Elijah. He had the bloodlines with Plexico. He's at a good school. I know his coach, Nick Campanelli, whose brother Vito coaches over at Bergen Catholic. The Campanelli brothers, I get the feeling, like Notre Dame a lot. And Notre Dame's second-string quarterback came from Bergen. So I do think that wide receiver should be of premium, should be their premier task for next year. And that said, Antavius Richardson is a quarterback coming out of Georgia. They think he's going to be a good wide receiver, and he is a very good athlete. He can run a sub 11 flat 100 meters. So he could be another guy. And a lot of times, I mentioned this before, you recruit athletes and then you put them in different place. A year before Eric Hansen passed away, I spent the day with him and on my show, and then just traveling around the campus with him. And he said the key thing was, first, you start with the defense line, but also you just recruit great athletes and you put them where you think you need the most help. And he did that a lot when he first got to Notre Dame, when he saw 260-pound running backs. He moved into offensive tackle, and they both had 10-year NFL careers. So I do think that Antavius Richardson can become a good wide receiver because he is a very good athlete. But I do think that the depth at wide receiver, what they really need is a super fast guy, a guy that can spread the defense, a guy that the corners can't play head up on. And I think they need one or two of those type guys. They don't have that. They've got steady wide receivers, usually good hands, but nobody spectacular. And I think that's what's been holding them back the last few years. No great wide receiver.
The fact that you said that you think Mike Brown's a good recruiter, now people have seen the Mike Denbrock offense. They're the number 4 scoring offense, although not big wide receiver stats. Do you think that this trend is going to start to change in 2026, that they will have a better class and get better guys to stick in the class, not just visit?
I think they're gonna, if they have to hit, the portal, they're gonna have to hit the portal for wide receivers for next year again, if they want an elite wide receiver. But they brought in some pretty average wide receivers in the portal this past year, I think. So I think don't go after anybody unless he's an elite wide receiver. There's no reason to bring in guys that are not better than the high school wide receivers you have on the campus, and give the high school guys a chance, or else they're going to leave. So you got to be pretty smart about the idea. But no one's going to get upset if you bring in an elite wide receiver who wants to transfer, and maybe instead of putting your quarterback money, which they did with Riley Leonard, put that money into the wide receivers this coming year, because Notre Dame's got some pretty talented ball players coming back at other positions. I think they're fairly loaded. I think Steve and CJ could do a good job at quarterback. I think it's about time they develop the high school quarterbacks and let them play instead of going after a new guy every year in the portal. And I do think Notre Dame's got money, NIL money. They have a number 11 class in the country. So I do think that they're able to put the money out. And I think the NIL money could go to wide receivers this year and have a fairly complete team next year. I don't see – you see a weakness on the defensive line. They're going to lose some pretty good ball players. But they've been putting linebackers on the defensive line, and it's worked out pretty good this year. But I do think they need interior defensive linemen. That's the same as wide receiver. They just haven't done the job. Davian Dixon, I don't think he's going to be ready to play when he comes in. And he's the only one that you could say that's coming in for this year that's a great interior defensive lineman. The other 3 from Chicago, Dominic Hulak, he's a Swiss Army knife. He's a tailback. He's a tight end. He's a wide receiver. He's a safety linebacker. They're going to put him at defensive end. So I think he's going to need some time to develop. Chris Burgess was the publicly defensive player of the year, so he's done a very good job. And Joe Reif had an excellent year. He gained 20 pounds of muscle. He was a completely different player this year than last year. He was his conference's defensive player of the year. So I like the fact that they're recruiting Chicago. Chicago's every year loaded with defensive linemen. They've always ignored it in the past, and these guys have gone on to the NFL careers, and Notre Dame says, well, we should have gone after him, always looking back retrospectively, and they think they should have hit the area harder. I mentioned this earlier on, I think, in one of your podcasts a while back. But in August, on the rosters for the NFL, there were 65 players from the Chicago area.
Right.
on the NFL, right? And Notre Dame only had two of them, even though they consider Chicago their backyard and their local area. It's only an hour away. So I think they got to do a better job in Chicago. And if they do, I don't think the defensive line problem will be there in the next couple of years if they hit the area the way they should.
Marcus did mention in his press conference on Wednesday prioritizing Chicagoland and getting the best guys out of Indiana. Now, Indiana doesn't have tons of prospects, but they had some good ones in this class. One other defensive lineman I wanted to ask you about, Gordy Solfstead. What do you think about him?
I went to his high school, St. X, twice this year. So I was actually with Gordy the day he was offered by Notre Dame. And he didn't know it at the time. So he was giving me, I thought he was leaning to Duke. He was probably close to committing to Duke. I saw him and his coach and Kirk Herbstreit's son and a couple other guys at the school. I leave, and then I get a message that Notre Dame just offered him, and he's going to commit. I think they gave him a take it now or go to Duke kind of a thing, because they offered him within an hour or two. He committed. So I think he's got some potential, but he's not ready yet. He's tall. He's lean I think they looking at him as an interior defensive lineman. I mean, he's got to put on another 40 or 50 pounds. He was 245 when I saw him a few months ago. So, but he's what Notre Dame is looking for is length. I tell them there's always an exception, like an Eric Donald or a Chris Zorich, but they always want length. So they don't go after the 6'1" defensive lineman. They go after the 6'5" Gordy type. So they like the length. They like the fact that he plays at a powerhouse, St. X, which is the best program in Ohio. And hopefully he could develop. But I thought he was, for Notre Dame, a B-list guy until they struck out on almost all the other defensive linemen that they were going after at that time.
Okay, we're going to take a question now. We're going to work some in during the show, and then we'll take a lightning round at the end. So don't be shy about filling up the question queue over there. And if you don't know how to do it, you're out of luck, because Tyler James isn't on the show. I don't know how to do the tutorial, but it's pretty easy. So this one, Tom, where does ND turn for top-level defensive line guys, names or states or programs when they're looking at 2026? Now, you mentioned Chicagoland area. Aren't they on a couple of guys from Chicago that are pretty good?
Very good. These are big-time guys. One's at Mount Carmel, who had committed to USC, and a week after he committed to USC, came back to visit Notre Dame again. So Damian Jones, he's a big-time ball player. Plus, he's got a new guy on his team, another a year behind him, defensive tackle. Mount Carmel's loaded. Mount Carmel, back in the 40s, 50s, 60s, used to be a Notre Dame stronghold. And then their coach, Frank Lenny, came in and didn't really want any of his players going to Notre Dame. Now they're back to liking Notre Dame again. So I do think that they could hit that area. There's another ball player who had been playing out in the south suburbs that moved to Chicago, Simeon, who I really liked. He's 6'5", 240 defensive end that they've offered. A defensive tackle, Gabe Hill, who has had a great year, all-state out in the western suburbs of Chicago. So there's three that they've offered. They're also looking at another guy from Brother Rice, who's a very good player. And there's going to be a couple more that develop. Talking to people, I was over at St. Ignatius a couple of days ago, and that school had the number one defensive tackle in the country that Notre Dame lost to Miami and Florida. He's already seeing action down there. That would have been a great one for Notre Dame because he's a good student. He's right in the downtown area of Chicago, so he went too far away, but they lost out on him, and he chose Miami and Ohio State really over Notre Dame. So they've got to do a better job. And all they have to do in Chicago is identify these guys as sophomores, stay on top of them. This staff is the best staff I've seen since Lou Holtz's staff in the late 80s. So I do think that they've got the ability to get these guys, but you got to stay on top. I always say it's a matter of personality and perseverance. You got to recruit for a couple of years now, stay on top of them, tell them all the great benefits that Notre Dame has. And there aren't any other schools, I think, in the country that has as many benefits as Notre Dame when it comes to everything, especially, not just football wise and the new facilities that are being built and all the old ones they still have. It's a great tradition, but I think it's the job placement, the graduation rate, which is the best in the country. And they're still putting a ton of guys into the NFL. So I do think that Chicago should be their priority. And it hadn't been for Brian Kelly, and that's why he didn't win a national title. I think Lou Holtz made it a priority. And when you look at the last time they almost won a national title, 93, almost the entire defensive line was from Chicago. Oliver Gibson, Brian Hamilton, and Bryant Young, the Hall of Famer. They're all from the Chicago area. And then when they won in '88, the last time they won a national title, it was loaded with Chicago guys. In the backfield was George Streeter and Stan Spagala. Then you had Chris Zorich on the defensive line. The offensive line was Joe Allen and Lindsey Knapp. They had a ton of Chicago players. And Tim Grenhard, the all-pro from the Chiefs, all from the Chicago area. Jeff Alm and on the defense line with Chris Zorich. These are all Chicago area guys. But then they bring in coaches that have connections to other areas like New Mexico or Arizona, places they're not going to get it, but they're still recruiting those areas. And that's what's happened over the past 25 years. They forgot about the area, while Michigan and Ohio State, even Alabama, guys came into Chicago and stole the players that rightly should have gone to Notre Dame.
Besides the Chicagoland defensive lineman in the 2026 class you named, where else should Notre Dame be looking for defensive linemen? Or are there guys that you know that they're on for 2026 that they have a good shot with that are elite?
Now, there's a defensive lineman down in, now he's moved back over to Sarasota, Cardinal Mooney, named Golden, that came in Notre Dame. Good shot. He's an interior guy, Elijah, and I really liked him. I've seen him 3 times in this past year, and it seems to me that he really likes Notre Dame a lot. So it looks like Al Washington's doing a good job with him. And I think the entire defense is also the responsibility of Al Golden, who's an excellent recruiter. So I do think they're in good hands. Georgia's loaded, but in Georgia, you're never going to get the defensive linemen away from the Atlanta area. You'll get them from the Atlanta area, but if they're out in the southern part of Georgia, those guys are not going to come to Notre Dame, just like the southern Mississippi guys are not going to come to Notre Dame, or the southern Alabama guys like C.J. May are not going to come to Notre Dame.
Why is that? Why is that?
But excuse me?
Why is that?
They're not, they're more rural type areas. They're kids that usually don't have a whole lot of money. The NIL money is very enticing to them, and rightly so. And then you got the local schools down in southern Mississippi or southern Alabama, like Ole Miss, LSU, Alabama, Auburn. Notre Dame's not going to beat them money-wise. But you go into Atlanta, more of a metropolitan area, those kids are willing to go almost everywhere. You'll see them going to Southern Cal. You'll see them going all the way out to Penn State. And you'll see them going to Notre Dame like Hamilton did. So you do see that area. But I do think that if Notre Dame followed the one rule that I used to tell Coach Kelly, and he never listened, it was in one ear and out the other one. You go to the Catholic school areas, you go into the DMV, you got St. John's in D.C., you got DeMatha, you got St. Francis.
We just lost Tom. Hopefully his phone didn't overload. I'm going to soft shoe while we try to get him back, and we'll see what's going on there. But Notre Dame signed a class of 25 recruits. Tom had them ranked 11th. Rivals had them ranked 12th. They have 4 commitments so far in the 2026 class. So we're going to talk a little bit more about what the priorities should be in the 2026 class besides the guys that they have gotten. This is great on live YouTube when the guy's phone. This happened this summer. We were doing Football Never Sleeps. I thought in the cold we wouldn't have the problem with the phone overheating, but Tom's phone apparently overheated, and we have him back, and we're going to put him on right now. Tom, you there?
Was calling me, and that was it. Can you see me now?
We can't see you, but we can hear you.
Let's see. There I am.
There you go. I thought maybe your phone overheated.
No, that was what happened last time because it was 98 degrees there in Louisville, and I was, but no, it's someone calls and then you lose me. I think you could still hear me, but I'm saying if Notre Dame followed the rule that I was getting to, in the DMV, you got St. John's, you got DeMatha, St. Francis, Good Counsel. The best league in the country is the Trinity League out in California. You got Bosco and Mater Dei, Orange Lutheran. You got Santa Margarita Catholic. The New Jersey Catholic League, they have hit that one. And I think you hit those 3 leagues and the Chicago Catholic League, Notre Dame could be a powerhouse and a team, always year long will be a national team that to be reckoned with, where they could be in the picture every year of the playoffs. And I think that's what they haven't done. They haven't really spent a lot of time in the Trinity League out in California. I told you, Bill McGregor at DeMatha in the past told me that Brian Kelly never came to visit his school. That's why they didn't have a shot at Chase Young and the guys. One of the top Catholic schools in the country, and the head coach doesn't go visit. So obviously you don't have – Marcus has already been there. which you would probably expect with Marcus. So I don't think that's a problem anymore. But I do think if you have the connections in those 4 Catholic leagues, you're going to really dine. And then you got Aquinas down in Florida. You got a couple of good Catholic schools in Atlanta. Bishop Gorman in Vegas. If you stay on top of those schools, you're going to be doing okay.
I misspoke while you were off and coming back. I said they had 4 recruits in the 2026 class so far. They actually have 5, and we'll get to that in a little bit.
Sure.
But there is a question about a guy in the 2025. The offensive lineman Nichols is supposed to be committing on December 24th. He has Notre Dame in his Final Four. What do you think of Nichols, and do you think Notre Dame has a good shot to get him?
Yes, they do have a good shot to get him. He seemed to be leaning to Notre Dame when I saw him back in the fall. And then I was over in Detroit about a month ago. Also had all the top players meet over at. I like Ben. I think Ben can also play guard, which is an important. Both Michigan, they have another one that's committed, Sullivan out of Michigan. Both of them are tackles that can also be moved to guard. And I think that's very important for Notre Dame because they do need interior help. They seem to be recruiting all these big tackles, and they're both very athletic. Nichols is all-state, I think 2 years running now. So that's a big catch for them if they could land him. I know Michigan State's involved. The other kid, Sullivan, Garvin, Michigan didn't offer him. So you got to wonder why, or Michigan's become a national recruiting team. And so I've always wondered why Michigan wouldn't go after a local guy, although he lives closer to Notre Dame than he does to Ann Arbor. So I could see that also.
Right. Okay. And let's switch back to the 2025 class. Who's your sleeper in the class? Who do you think maybe is going to surprise some people?
There's 2 guys. I mentioned Elijah Burris. He's the big sleeper because coming in when they got him committed, he wasn't very good. I mean, he was an average. I was shocked because I think he averaged like 12 yards a catch or 13 yards a catch. High school wise should always average over 20 yards a catch because you're playing against high school competition. And they had a good team at DePaul, very good quarterback also. So he really took off this year and became the best wide receiver, in my opinion, in the entire East. So that was a good catch. They kind of lucked into him, got him early before other big schools. Rutgers had offered him, which they offer everybody in New Jersey. And the other sleeper, to me, is a sleeper because I think he's a top 100 player, maybe even top 80 or 70, James Flanagan. James' dad was one of my All-Americans back in '89 in that great, great class. I followed Notre Dame when I was 8 years old in 1963. That class was great. And that's comparable to the '89 class. Those are the 2 best classes they've had over the past 60 plus years. And then James Flanagan was a big part of that. He was the other member of that great foursome on defensive line. He came as a linebacker to Notre Dame out of Green Bay. He was a all-state in football and track. James Jr. is all-state in football, hockey, and track. So he's taller 3 by 3 inches than his dad. I just think he'll be an elite tight end. He'll be in the NFL as a tight end. The way he can move and catch, he's a Cole Kmet without a doubt. And I think that he's better than what people have him ranked, which a lot of guys are. I think a lot of the rankings I've seen on the internet are based on how many offers you have. But I think Flanagan, because he was up in Green Bay, didn't see a lot of the schools never came to see him. So those 2 are the big surprises in this class.
So they lose Deuce Knight to decommitment. He ends up at Auburn, and he was flirting with Mississippi too. They end up with Blake Hebert. What's your assessment of how they were able to recover and get Hebert? What kind of quarterback is he, and did they do a good job at quarterback?
It's a great catch. Notre Dame is one of the best schools of going after other people's quarterbacks after they lost all the guys they're after, because they've done that for years, and it's been successful for them, at least to the way where they could still lead the team. Never an elite guy. Blake's a very good quarterback. I went and saw him as a junior in Boston. Then he transferred to Connecticut at the Brunswick School, which is right on the border of New York. Because when I went there to see his other 2 teammates that are coming to Notre Dame, Ethan and Maddie, he hadn't been there yet. He was still playing in Boston, thought maybe going to a prep school. I don't know why. He had already committed to Clemson before he left. And then he wanted to get, his stats are pretty same as they were as a junior. So I thought it was a lateral move for him. But that said, thought he was the 2nd best quarterback in the East next to the kid from Pennsylvania who's going to Maryland. And I thought Blake's got good size. He's got a good arm. He's a really good catch later on after they were struggling to find another quarterback because they put all their eggs in his basket and Blake's basket. So they did the same, a couple years ago with the quarterback from Detroit and went to UCLA. They wound up getting a pretty good quarterback out of Muncie and Ian Book. I mean, almost everybody they've gotten as quarterbacks was on the rebound. So they've done a good job rebound. I would like to see them keep Noah Grubbs because that's their guy, and they did with C.J. Carr. So I think Gino's an outstanding quarterback coach and a great recruiter, better recruiter than Tommy Rees. So I think they're in a good position at quarterback. And what I know about Gino was every quarterback I saw last year, he had already checked out. And I think that's a great coach. That's a great recruiter. When you look at everybody, you've got a quarterback line of maybe 4 or 5 guys that you really want. You got your number 1 all the way down to 5, and that's what Gino does. So I think with Noah Grubbs, that was his number 1 guy, him and the kid Hart. But I think Noah was ready to commit it before Brady Hart was, and he took him. So I like the way he's recruiting, and I like Blake coming after Blake. Blake could be a guy that could be a big steal because he has the ability. His stats are not great, but they're good. But his size and his potential is very good.
Okay, we have another question from the 2025 class. Tom, is Will Black the most athletic offensive lineman ND has committed in the last 20 years? Wow, you would know about the 20 years. That sounds like a pretty big boast. What do you think, Tom?
They've had some great, but no, he's not. He's very good. He's not. I thought, what's his name? Ronnie Stanley was super athletic coming out of Vegas. Matter of fact, I mean, he had everything. He could really move. Also, Quentin Nelson was super athletic. He was even playing defensive tackle out in New Jersey. And I remember talking to Urban Meyer about him before he committed. Came down to Notre Dame and Ohio State for Quentin. Urban said, this is the best and most athletic tackle we've seen in a long time. Because remember, he was a tackle in high school. He said, this guy overpowers everybody. Then he could run. He's built like a Coke machine, but he could still run. And so, no, I do think that the 3 guys they got coming in now, and Black is very athletic, but Notre Dame has done a great job with offensive linemen. To say he's the most athletic is a bit of a stretch. Let's say he's among the most athletic over the past 20 years.
Okay. And then Madden Farema was the signing day surprise, at least to most of us. I'm wondering if you were surprised and why you think Madden ended up at Notre Dame.
I'm shocked that, and the reason is I was talking to Madden for the past month now, almost every other day, because he's one of my finalists for the Butkus Award. It'll come down to him or Christian Jones in Nebraska, who actually I thought wanted to go to Notre Dame also, but Notre Dame kind of pushed him aside for a while, who's a great linebacker, and Riley Pettijohn, who's going to Ohio State from Texas. Those are the 3. So when I talked to him, I usually do all the nominations, knock it down to like 16 and 5, a guy know, and then there's a whole group of guys that'll vote on the guys, including Matt Butkus. Dick used to vote, and he passed away in October. So we were doing the thing, and I called Madden up after I heard, and I think it was I don't know, I'm sure it wasn't you, Eric, but some Notre Dame websites had him projected to go to USC a day or 2 before he announced. So they're crystal ball, which means that they've talked to one of the college coaches that tells them, I think we're getting them. That's usually what a crystal ball is.
That's what a crystal ball is. Okay.
Yeah, that's what it is. It's not. I did the same thing. I got a story. Emmett Smith's coaching one of our coaches for the U.S. Army game in 2 weeks, and I got an Emmett Smith story about that. But I'll save that for a later day. Anyway, it was crystal balling him. So I called Madden up. I said, Madden, if you're going to USC, why don't you announce it the day if you win the Butkus? And he didn't get back to me because I think it took him by surprise, knowing that people were predicting he's going to USC because he hadn't made a decision yet. So those decisions were all wrong. Madden had always been Notre Dame USC. He grew up as a USC fan, but he loved Notre Dame. And like I said, I saw him a month ago, and then I saw him. So really, somebody jumped the gun, and all of a sudden, when one guy jumps the gun, everyone else picks up on it. He's all locked. He's a lock for USC. It never was a lock for USC, and Notre Dame got him at the end. I thought it was 50-50 both schools, and he's one of the as I said, one of the 3 finals for the Butkus, which is going to be announced in a few days. So Notre Dame's gotten, I think, had 3 Butkus Award winners. I know Manti was the first guy we gave it to, and then Jalen Smith, and one of their linebackers. What's his name? Anyway, from Indiana, he's he was one of them too. So they've done well with the Butkus Wars over the past 16 years. And Matt last year, Asa came in second to Sammy Brown out of Georgia, or out of Georgia's who played at Clemson this year. So Notre Dame's Al Golden's done a great job with the linebackers, and as I said, he's a great recruiter, and I know that's where he zooms in on. Even though he's a defensive coordinator, he was recruiting linebackers until this year when they got a linebacker coach, but he still had his hand in all the linebackers and has done a great job.
Speaking of linebackers, let's stay on Faramo for just a second. Who does he compare to that's on their roster right now? Is he an inside guy, outside guy, both?
I think he's definitely inside. He plays both, but he's definitely an inside guy. He's big. He's almost 6'3", 230. He's got size. Size-wise, he's some like Manti Te'o, and a little bit taller, not quite as quick twitch as Manti was, but he's there. He's a very athletic guy. He's a big-time ball player. He's an inside linebacker. He's a great catch for Notre Dame. And to top it off, he's a Notre Dame type of a player. He's got that great personality. He's very religious, like Manti was or is. And he's going to fit into Notre Dame perfectly. I thought he was a great fit for Notre Dame, so as Asa was too. And I think I had this little video I did a year ago with Asa, him, and a couple of other guys, LeVar Arrington and his son. And we did it as a joke out at UCLA, but he was there, and I remember he spent a lot of time. Asa was not committed to Notre Dame at the time, and I saw them both really connecting. They're both Polynesian. I'm not sure if they're both Tonganese or Samoan, but they seem to have a great connection, those two. So I'm sure Asa did a great job of helping him find out all the great things about Notre Dame, despite the fact that it could be very cold when you're walking around campus in December, January, and February. And these guys are usually walking around in sandals and tank tops, have to get used to. And I think Madden is one of those 18-year-olds going on 30, just like Marcus was in high school when I had Marcus as our captain of the U.S. Army game. They're much more mature. Madden's a very mature young man, as is Asa. These guys are focused on football. They know that that's what's got them to college. They're not rich people, but gotten to college. And you love those kind of guys, particularly both of them are going to wind up as captains of Notre Dame. You can almost guarantee that. And they both are tremendous inside backers. As I said, Marcus and Al Golden and Chad did a great job recruiting these guys. Linebacker and DB, they're set. Even, like I said, two of the linebackers are playing on the defensive line this year. If they could just get that defensive line consistency going and recruiting, then they're going to have a defensive they're going to have a defensive group just like Alabama, Georgia, and Ohio State. And they're pretty close to it right now as soon as they get a couple of impact defensive linemen.
Keep the comments coming. Keep the questions coming. We're going to get to a question in a second. We're going to hit the lightning round toward the end of the show. But I did want to follow up, Tom, on linebackers. How about the other two in the class that are actually going to play linebacker, Anthony Saka and Ka'o Kia? What are your assessment of those two?
Kia, boy, I liked him a lot. He's better than his brother. And the brother was good too, but I saw his film and then I met him. What a nice kid he is. He's got length, and watch him. He's going to gain, you could tell he's got the frame that's going to gain 20 pounds of muscle over the next year or so. So he could possibly wind up as a rush end or play linebacker. But Saka is a terrific ball player. I think he's very close to being a top 100 guy. He's going to be, I think, if he gets it this year, a 4-time All-Stater, first team.
Wow.
And playing in the number one program in Pennsylvania, St. Joseph's. And I think that Saka, he's got that mentality. He's a tough, mean kid. His dad had that as a quarterback and went to Penn State, Tony Saka. But he brought that mentality to the linebackers. Even the coaches say, in practice, he's kind of got that Chris Sorich mentality of just a Tasmanian devil type player. So, but I think Saka will wind up as a defensive end. He's already big. When I saw him back in June, he was 240. So I would imagine he'll wind up 260 or so. And if he can keep that quickness that he's got right now, he's going to be another great player. So I really like him coming in. Another Al Golden guy, because Al played with his dad at Penn State, Tony Saka. So Golden got him. And when I saw Saka, I called up Al Golden. I said, this kid is a tough son of a gun. I said, everyone seems to be afraid of him on the team even. So those are the kind of guys you want. As long as they don't do that off the field, those are the kind of guys you want at Notre Dame. And I think Anthony Saka is legit. He's another one that goes with Flanagan and Burris when you talk about surprises. I saw people ranking them very low, and I was thinking these people must not have seen him in person or on film or watch him play like I have done over the past 4 years. This is a big time guy, believe me. Saka is going to surprise a lot of people. When you play against that great competition that St. Joe does and you dominate, and the other linebackers are going Power 5 also, but Saka's the guy. So obviously he's a great ball player, and I'd put him right in there with Madden and well, Key, I think's he's got the potential. He's not quite as good as those two guys are right now, but he will, I think, in the long run, become a big time guy.
Okay, we're going to take 2 questions here, and then we'll go back to me bugging you, and then again we'll hit a lightning round toward the end of the show. Here's one question: Tom, do you feel Al Washington is just a bad evaluator, or it seems Al can't get the Viper end position recruited? So I'm let you answer that from Enigma.
First is he's a good coach. That's the important thing. Yeah, the D line looked good this year, and I don't think it's that talented. Right? I always thought Riley coming out of Chicago was a good player, but he turned it on last year and this year. 2 years ago, I think he kind of gave the Williams kid the Heisman by missing every single tackle he tried. But that said, Mike Elston recruited him, and they recruited their other All-American out of New Jersey, and the other defensive ends are really from a high school linebacker. So I do think that he's got to step up his recruiting game. He's got to go after the 5-star defensive linemen. Those are as I said, Eric Parsegian told me you start with the defensive line. Urban Meyer told me that. So did Pete Carroll. Guys that are on my Mount Rushmore of the greatest coaches I've seen and doing the 46 years I've been doing this. They all said you start with the defensive line, then you work from there. And Notre Dame has to do that. Marcus, Al Washington, Al Golden, they've got to concentrate on the great defensive linemen. There's a good number of them. Some of them don't have grades. I can understand that, why they don't go after them. Like the kid from Fenwick High School in Chicago this year who's going to sign with Michigan, even though he'd been committed all year to Auburn. But he got, I think, close to $1 million from Michigan, Oracle money. So, but he didn't have grades for Notre Dame, or else Notre Dame probably would have had a good shot at him. Another great, he's a 5-star defensive lineman from Chicago. Another one, Nate Marshall. So, but there's enough of those guys that have grades that they should zoom in on. I would offer twice as many as they've offered right now, and I think that's the key. If you don't get in early on a lot of these big-time players, you don't have a shot when you come in later, because their ego has already been built up by people like myself and the college coaches and the fans, thinking that they're better than what they really are at this stage in high school. But you got to go after them, and you got to work on them. Find them. If you identify him as a freshman, stay on top of him and work hard. Sophomore, junior. If you built up that relationship over 2 or 3 years, it's gonna be awfully tough to turn Notre Dame down with everything that Notre Dame has to offer. I found out later the job placement for all the students is like 99%. I mean, that's the school. No school has that. I mean, that's unbelievable. I know being a small school really helps, but the connections for the football players, I've seen football players that I started with in the late 70s, early 80s that are from Notre Dame. They've all made it big. Guys that were borderline students have become millionaires. So everything that Notre Dame has offered, like I said, facilities, great tradition, and an NBC TV contract. They got a lot to offer. It's a matter of selling it, but selling it in a length of time, more than just a couple of months. Selling it for 2-3 years, you beat that into the kid's head, you're most time going to go after him. And that's what Nick Saban had told me that too. He gets on. Nick took me to his board every time I visited Tuscaloosa. He had a freshman board, even an 8th grade board, players that they already noticed as 8th graders that they got to keep an eye on. And he made sure his coaches, if they didn't do the job of recruiting a freshman, sophomore, junior, they were gone in 2 years. Nick had like Urban, they had a pretty good turnover of assistant coaches because he realized the guys that weren't doing the job. I don't know if Marcus has that kind of mentality. I think he's very loyal to his guys. But if they're not doing the job for you, then you know what? Later on, they can come after your head. All it takes is one bad year. Just ask the coach at Florida State, who I thought did a great job last year, and the fans want him killed right now. They want him out. And I can't understand it because he's an excellent recruiter. It's just that circumstances. But fans turn on you. Nick Saban lost 2 games one year, and the fans wanted him out at Alabama. That's how things quickly change. So you got to constantly recruit. And if you constantly recruit, you're going to do okay.
Kind of in the same vein, we're talking about defensive linemen. What do you think of Chris Burgess out of Chicago?
Chris has done a great job this year. He was publicly, I think, Defensive Player of the Year. Chris put on a lot more muscle. I tried to get him into the Army game because the other two Chicago players that come into the Army game, Joe Reif and Dominic Hulak, but Chris is going to play for one of the other games, and he really dominated, I thought, this year. Chris has the potential to become a big-time star, another Chicago player. Simeon High School, Chicago Public League, doesn't have a lot of money, so you only hear of a couple of schools and all that, but Simeon's the powerhouse in football. The coach has done a great job over there, and there's another one for next year that Notre Dame's offered at Simeon too. So Al Washington should just plant himself in Chicago, and if he lands the guys, that's all he's got to do is recruit Chicago players, and he's going to have a great defensive line. And like I said, might as well recruit a player from Chicago rather than go to Southern Alabama or Southern Georgia or Southern Mississippi and waste your time down there because you're not going to get those guys. Same thing with the players from the interior of Texas. Texas has been very good to Notre Dame, but for the most part, they'll come from the areas where kids aren't afraid to travel. But if you go into the rural areas of Texas, and there's a couple of good defensive linemen there, they're going to go to A&M more than even Texas. And Notre Dame they'll visit because Notre Dame's got such a big name, but you're wasting your time. You're spinning your wheels. I think there's plenty of guys that go around in the Trinity League that are defensive linemen, or in the DMV in Maryland and Virginia and DC, or the Chicago Catholic League or New Jersey Catholic League. You go after guys like that, you're going to be all set. So, I mean, sometimes it seems like I'm spitting in the wind when I'm talking about that, because I do think that Marcus does listen, like you say, Eric, about the Chicago area. Kelly never listened. Charlie never listened about the Chicago area. They didn't do very well there. Tyrone definitely did. And Lou Holtz, Tyrone, and Kelly had one thing in common. They were prolific golfers. And I always said as a joke, show me a prolific golfer and I'll show you a lousy recruiter. Because recruiting, the kind of money these guys are making, recruiting's got to be their hobby, not golf. And I said that to Steve Spurrier. He took offense to it. Rick Neuheisel, my co-host at CBS, took it. But Rick Neuheisel got beaten badly by Pete Carroll on almost every top guy in LA. Pete Carroll wasn't out golfing; he was out recruiting, and I think that's a key thing. And you get the whole staff doing that, you're going to be successful if recruiting is your hobby.
Well, I play putt golf, so okay. You mentioned the Army All-Star Game, so you're associated with the Army All-Star Game. Tell us about it, where it is, and then we'll answer this question.
We're playing it at the Star, which I think seats 15,000, 20,000 people, which is the way you should do it. When we did
Frisco,
the Army
right?
Alamo, in Frisco, Texas, it's the Dallas Cowboys facility. Jerry Jones, I made a deal with it, and Emmett Smith and Jason Witten are two head coaches. So obviously, the Dallas area is going to be excited about it. I'm doing the broadcast, and I'm the lead guy for picking the team. But because we just started up again last year, we have some really good ball players coming. Obviously, I think 5 Notre Dame guys, and I know Davian Dixon's going to be in the game also. But also, I think now the Army's getting very much into it, so you're going to see it getting bigger and bigger every year, just like it did when we started in 2001. The first year wasn't that great. We played it outdoors in cold weather. The key thing was I was able to talk Denzel Washington into having his son play in the game, which gave us star power because he had won the Academy Award that year for training day. So we don't have to do that this year with the Army game, but we do have star power Jason Witten and Emmett Smith and some other famous coaches like Josh Booty and people like that in the game. Houston Nutt was going to be there, but family's had some health problems, and he's going to come back next year. So I'm excited. I was down there last year, but this year now it's going to be broadcast. And I like the fact that we got some really good ball players. Best player in Mississippi, Caleb Cunningham, is going to be there. So we got some star power in this year's game, and next year is going to be even better. But I did invite Blake Herbert as one of the 7 quarterbacks we have coming down. But Blake said he couldn't go because he's going to be on Notre Dame campus watching the practice. So he didn't want to play in the game. And Jerome Bettis chose not to play in the game. And Elijah Burris, who was in the game, said he has to concentrate on his grades, which I could understand. I don't know what kind of student Elijah is, but Plexco wasn't a very good student in high school. So hopefully Elijah is better than Plexco. But he just backed out of the game a couple of weeks ago, Elijah. But we do have a few other players in the game.
And what's the date?
It's December 21st, so it's coming up in a couple of weeks.
So it could be the same day as a Notre Dame playoff game.
Exactly. So don't watch the Notre Dame playoff game. Watch our game, U.S. Army game. I know when it happened, I go, oh, I didn't realize the playoffs are going to be December 21st. I'm going to be up in the booth, so I have no idea who's winning the game or anything going on if we're playing it at the same time. Hopefully, we're not. Our game starts in the early afternoon, so I don't know what time Notre Dame doesn't know yet what time their game will start.
Right.
But I
We'll
can
know
guarantee you
tomorrow.
I'll guarantee it'll be much warmer, and we're indoors playing our game at the Star, and in Dallas it'll be much warmer than it'll be. Uh, for Notre Dame's sake, it could be wind chill below zero. Who knows? If they're playing Alabama or a team like that down in the South, it could be to Notre Dame's benefit.
Okay. So Jeff's follow-up to that is, are the big senior all-star games losing their swag, maybe being replaced with school on-site camps? What do you think, since you're part of one? Do you think the all-star games are losing their swagger?
Yeah, I think they are. That's where we're playing our game before Christmas. I think they're going to have to adjust later too and play their games after. We always played when we did the Army game right after New Year's, or right a couple of days before New Year's, a couple of days after. But now what happened is it's not on campus camps. They're not allowed camps on campus at that in January. It's a dead period. What it is players are going to campus early. They're becoming midterm recruits. So a lot of them are just leaving and they're already at their prospective campus early. So that's what's happened. And then I was the one that first came up with the idea of having players announce during the game. Back, Chris Leak was our first guy to announce. The next year we had 18 guys announce, and then the next year 22. NBC loved it. They loved having these guys announce. But what's happened now? All the guys are committed just about now. No one's ready to announce. There's a couple of guys that they may hold off, but everyone knows where they're going already. So it's ridiculous to have it. And that was a big draw for NBC, getting the guys to announce. They liked that better than the actual game that was being played. We'd go up in the booth the night before and kids would tell us where they're going. And then that was a big, big thing. They didn't care about the game at all. They cared about the announcements, and so did the fans. So losing that hurt these games. So I think, playing it before Christmas helps, because then they have no excuse. Although Blake had an excuse of, I got to go watch practice. But overall, I think that's what you're going to see. Under Armour, I think, struggled anyway with their game. And the other game, now it's called the Navy game, I think, because I think they've lost a little luster also. So they're trying to grab onto whatever happens. So all of us are struggling a bit. Hopefully playing the games before Christmas will be the answer.
Okay. You and I had a conversation about Notre Dame women's basketball yesterday. And amidst that, we did talk some recruiting. And you threw out a stat that I want you to share with our viewers about how many of the top 100 kids changed their mind about where they were going. Can you throw that stat out and what you think drove that?
Yeah, I thought it was close to 50%. They had committed somewhere and then they switched schools. And it's by design now, so fans should be aware of this. Notre Dame gets some ball players committed early, like a Deuce Knight. It's because they're being advised. They all have advisors now. These are high school guys that have sort of like agents. I call them agents. They call them advisors. They're telling them commit. And then as soon as you commit, I'll start talking to the other schools about getting more money than that one that's given you, that you're committed to. So you're seeing that all the time of these ball players switching schools. And I know Notre Dame fans follow just Notre Dame. But if you look down the list, there were so many guys. I'm doing my top 300 for my January magazine, and I noticed that yesterday and the day before, half the guys were committed to schools they weren't to. I talked about Nate Marshall committed to Auburn. On non-signing day, he signed with Michigan because Michigan gave more money than what Auburn offered him. And you see that going on. Obviously, the number one player in the country, Bryce Underwood, had been committed like 15 months to LSU. He switches to Michigan for Oracle money. And I've heard the rumor, $10 million or $12 million for a high school quarterback. That's amazing to me. He better come through, or Michigan fans are going to be throwing him under the bus. So it's pressure coming on. But when you go through all the players that had committed elsewhere or switched over, it's amazing to me. And Notre Dame, got their quarterback because he switched. I don't even imagine. I don't know what Notre Dame gave Blake, but it might have been more than what Clemson gave Mark. Who knows? Clemson's got money too, so I don't know about what happened there. Also, because I think Notre Dame might have, what the fans aren't aware of, that when some guys leave, I think like Justin Thurman or like the Anderson kid running back, they might have been pushed a little bit out. realizing they didn't have great years. Justin Thurman is one of those guys, but he wasn't top 100. But I do think that Anderson and Thurman might have been pushed out a little bit by Notre Dame, realizing maybe they could get better running backs. Notre Dame's not adverse to doing that like all the other schools do. You know, you got to keep it at 85, so you want to keep your list and you want to make sure it's going to be a real good class. So sometimes when Notre Dame loses a guy, and Deuce wasn't the case with Deuce, but or CJ May. But once you lose a guy, sometimes why did this guy leave or this and that? You always got to check to see maybe that school actually shoved him. They didn't tell him to leave, but they kind of let him know by not calling him and not staying in touch with him. He gets the idea, he leaves, and it looks like he's the one that's jumping ship. So there's that also, that element into the recruiting process. Now that's why everything's so fluid in recruiting. It's always great to get an early commitment, but then the key thing is hang on to these guys. Now it looks like you're hanging on to 50% of your early commitments.
Okay. We're going to go to the lightning round here in a minute, but I wanted to talk about 2026 recruiting. So if you haven't submitted your question, get it in now so I can review it and make sure that there's no naughty words in there. The 2026 class, we talked about Sullivan Garden. Just a quick comment on each of these guys. Dylan Faison, wide receiver from Boca Raton.
Just like his brother. I've seen him. He looks like his brother too. And he came to two of my different things, and I really like him. He's quick. He's not super fast, but he's quick. Like I mentioned about Notre Dame, they're after this kid named Salmon down in Virginia. He ran a 10-400 meters. That's what they need, a guy that can stretch a defense. That is more of a slot back type, Faison is. And I think he's not the kind of guy that, the go-to super guy, the guy that can stretch a defense where the cornerbacks are deathly afraid of him and you always need safety help. But he's a good solid wide receiver.
How about Thomas Davis Jr., linebacker from Matthews, North Carolina?
Outstanding. Another great linebacker. He's a 4-star plus linebacker, a big catch for them. I was teasing him. I just saw him again about a month ago, but I always have a big get together in Raleigh at Cardinal Gibbons High School across the street from North Carolina State Stadium. And I always have, every top player in North Carolina always shows up. Except Thomas Davis last year, except he was there, but he came late. He got in the group photo. I didn't know he was there. I had no time to talk to him. I called him up. He said, should have let me know you were there. I was there for 4 hours, but I did see him, and later on, watch him on film. He can fly to the ball. He's like a strong safety playing linebacker. He can really run. He can hit. He's a big-time guy that they're going to have to hang on to because he's got a ton of offers already. So it's good they got him early commitment, but he's one of the guys they're going to have to keep an eye on and watch. Although he's a good student, he's a solid person. I always look at guys, Notre Dame recruits guys a little bit different as does Stanford, Northwestern, a lot of the private schools. Some kids look like, you shake their hand and you check your wallet in the back pocket. You might say, hey, this guy may not be a type of guy coming to your school. But when you look at him, Thomas Davis is a solid citizen type guy, and that's the kind of guys that Notre Dame always kind of looks at. They made a few mistakes along the way. Lou Holtz's guys, a couple of them, but back in the day, but most of them were, bright and young Jerome Bettis types, solid citizens, wonderful people, and great football players. And those are the kind of guys that Notre Dame always kind of looks at. Thomas Davis is like that. Bryant Young's son, who I've known for years as a little kid, he looks like he's playing Bryce Young very well.
Yeah.
Nicest kid in the world. You wouldn't even think he'd be, but what an athlete he is. But when you talk to him, he's the yes, sir, or no, sir, sweetest guy in around, just like his dad was. Brian, coming out of Chicago. I knew Brian as a sophomore, junior, senior out of Bloom. Same thing. And those are the kind of guys Notre Dame zooms in on. And Thomas Davis is just like that. So in a roundabout way, I'm saying he's a great catch and many different areas for Notre Dame.
What about the kid that committed from Chattanooga, which is where you've been spending some time, Chasten Smith?
He's a little different. He seems shy, kind of, when I listen to him talking to him. He's an outstanding DB. I saw him at Bearden High School 6 months ago. I didn't know he was over at McCallie. I was at McCallie last Saturday, just a week ago, and I'm watching. They have a real good running back who's from Montreal, Canada, and I spent a lot of time talking to him. And there was Chasten Smith there, and I go, so I didn't ask for him to come by, so I talked to him, and he commits a day or two later to Notre Dame. He told me he was going to go through the whole process and everything else, and all of a sudden he commits to Notre Dame. So they're definitely going to have to keep an eye on Chasten for the whole year because he's a big-time corner. He's got length. He's got real good speed. Mike Mickens, though, is like I said, he's the best DB coach in the country, recruiting and coaching. And if anybody questioned that, just watch the USC game where he's got two guys returning interceptions for like 150 yards each. So, I mean, these guys ran the whole field on interception. That's Mike Mickens. And his best player's been hurt for half the year, Morrison. So he's done a great job. This kid's just like that. He's another real good athlete. So hang on to him. But Mike Mickens is the right guy to stay on him for the whole year. Hopefully they can keep Mike Mickens for another couple of years before he becomes a head coach.
Where should Notre Dame be prioritizing? I mean, you have to recruit every position, but I would imagine in the 26 cycle, wide receivers is going to get a lot of attention. Defensive linemen get a lot of attention. What's your thoughts?
That's it. Those two positions.
Okay.
That's where they need the most help. They need a Connor Selman type guy, the kid out of Virginia that they've offered, who's 6'3", 180, runs a 4.39 40. They need to go after every single guy like that. There's a couple in Texas next year. They're always are in California. I'll be out there in the spring again. But they need to get that, and then they need some big interior defensive linemen. They got some good ones coming out of Chicago on the edge, and they got some good linebackers from that area too. But I do think that they need some big defensive tackle type prospect coming in. And once they get those guys, I think they'll be setting up pretty good. So I that everything's setting up for Notre Dame, but they do need defensive tackle prospects. The Dixon kid's good, but they need the impact type guys that could come in and play right away, like a lot of these schools get. Georgia, Alabama, Ohio State, they're loaded on those defensive line, but they got freshmen that'll come in and play right away for them. Georgia's got a couple coming in next year that are going to be five stars that are going to be number one draft picks. Elijah Griffin being the big guy, and I think that's a massive catch for them. So there's guys like that all over the country. But if I'm Notre Dame, I would zero in on Chicago, Ohio, schools that more likely would have players that are states that more likely have guys go towards Notre Dame. And they're great players in the South, but it's awfully difficult to bring them up. And I do think the kid in Florida's at. He left IMG quickly, Elijah Golden, which most of the kids do. They'll leave IMG. It doesn't seem like too many of them like IMG, at least the ones I talked to. He went back to now, but he's at a Catholic school run by an ex-Notre Dame player. I think Jared Clark, the quarterback, is the head coach at Cardinal Mooney. He's got Elijah Golden now, so Notre Dame's got all the ties they need at that school to bring in an impact defensive tackle. So hopefully they do that, and hopefully they'll get 3 or 4 more like that.
Roof Camper, and thank you for getting the caps key okay on the question, even though you didn't on your handle there. Do you guys think Noah Grubbs can start at any point? Do you think he's good enough, Tom, to be a starter?
Yeah, he is.
Okay.
He can spin it, and he's got size. He's been coached well. He's got a quarterback coach that's been with him for a number of years, who's done a good job with him. But CJ is good. Steve is good. Mincy, he's going to have to wait his turn, and that's the problem when you got with high school quarterbacks. They don't like to wait their turn anymore. So, but Noah's got the ability.
Tom, you just froze up, and you just disappeared. So I think we're going to call it a day there. I appreciate everybody, all the questions. Appreciate Tom Lemming joining us. He is maybe coming back here. Let's see. Let's get him back. We have a big black box, so we're going to end it here. Again, thanks for all the questions, comments. You can leave some comments below, and we'll try to get to those questions after the show when it's in the replay form. And remember, Tyler James will be back with me on Monday night for Football Never Sleeps. And Tom's going to say goodbye. Here he is. Tom, you came back just in time to say goodbye to everybody.
Yeah, Kathy just called me. I said, "Oh, don't call me right." Whenever I get a call, it knocks my video out and all that. But anyway, what was I just saying right before we were going to hang out?
We were talking about Noah Grubbs and his ability to start. You said a lot of guys don't like to wait. High school quarterbacks don't like to wait.
Yeah, and Noah's got the ability. All these guys got the ability. Gino's got the ability to coach him. He's done it. He did a great job at Cincinnati. He developed an NFL quarterback down there. I just think it's time for Notre Dame to zoom in on their high school quarterbacks, develop them. They've got 4 guys with Noah coming in next year that one of them is going to turn out to be great. Probably 2 or 3 of them will be. So I think it's up to Gene to get them going and forget the NIL. Put that NIL money maybe into a great defensive lineman or a great wide receiver, and then Notre Dame is going to be sitting pretty next year.
Tom, do you have anything you want to plug? Any newsletters or anything that's going out here soon that you want to promote?
Well, my January magazine's coming out. They could just go to TomLemmingFootball.com and you can see all the stuff that I have going on with the TV, the radio, and the magazines.
Okay, last question from me, and I'll show you this mug. This is I always use this on Football Never Sleeps. Do you know who gave me this mug?
No.
Pete Chiavarelli.
My dear friend Pete Chiavarelli, manager of the Rock Group Chicago, former Notre Dame player, and the guy that Eric Hansen's surrogate son. Pete's a wonderful guy, probably one of the people out there that helps Notre Dame more than anybody could ever recognize when it comes to the band, donating money and everything else. He's done a tremendous job. He is Mr. Notre Dame, if you ask him. It's not Rudy, believe me. It's Pete Chiavarelli, who was the original Rudy, because he came to Notre Dame 4 years later. He paid with cash his tuition. He had to walk on to the program. Everything that Rudy did, Pete did 4 years before him. But Pete didn't promote himself for a movie, or else it would have been called. They would have been yelling Pete, Pete, Pete instead of Rudy.
Last thing, Notre Dame will start their playoff run December 20th or 21st. Do you think this roster is talented enough to legitimately vie for a national title this year?
I do. I think two things that scared me a little bit. They didn't really get much of a pass rush against USC. So when they play elite teams, that could bother you. I don't know if they have the athletes that can get that pass rush against elite teams. They could do it against Army, Navy, other teams like that. So hopefully they do have that. We'll see. The defensive line's not that bad, but it's just not a great. But also I think it comes down to if Riley Leonard could throw deep every now and then with accuracy. If he can do it, because he can run, he can throw the short pass. But against teams like the elite teams, you got to have an elite quarterback as a passer also. And that's how all the last national championships all had elite passers, guys that have been throwing the ball deep with accuracy. So if Riley can do that and the defensive line can apply pressure on the quarterback, Notre Dame can win a national title.
Well, Tom, I know Kathy wants that call back. Thank you for joining us today. Really appreciate it. Thanks, everybody, for joining us. And again, Tyler and I will be back Monday night at 7 o'clock for our regular edition of Football Never Sleeps. Thanks again, everybody.